I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Something has shaken the royal house of Valdoria, and tonight the palace can no longer keep it quiet. Crown Prince Cassian did not walk into the briefing hall by himself. Beside him stood his aunt, Princess Isolde, the Princess Royal, her jaw set and her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Then came the line that no one inside the palace had expected to hear spoken aloud. Young Prince Rowan, third in line to the Valdorian throne, would be withdrawn from every major public appearance until further notice. The boy had survived a serious breach of his personal security. But the truth waiting behind that single sentence was far heavier than the sentence itself. Cassian entered the room without the usual pleasantries. He did not shake hands or nod to the officials seated along the long oak table. As the future king, he carried the expectations of an entire nation on his shoulders. But in that moment he was simply a father trying to explain why his youngest son could no longer safely stand on a balcony, walk in a procession, or smile for cameras at a state dinner. Isolde followed him in, and where his voice cracked slightly, Hayes did not. She had spent 3 decades in royal service, quietly proving that duty and discipline could coexist with compassion. Her loyalty tonight pointed in only one direction: protecting Rowan. When she confirmed to the room that the boy would step back from public life, something in her tone made it clear there would be no negotiating. Tradition could wait. The palace calendar could wait. A frightened 7-year-old could not. The officials in the room pressed for details, and reluctantly, Cassian gave them. The breach had not happened on a crowded street or during an unplanned walkabout, situations the security teams trained for constantly. It had happened inside Aldermote Palace itself, past 3 checkpoints that were supposed to be impenetrable. A side corridor, rarely used and rarely monitored, had been left unsecured during a delegation visit, and for almost 4 minutes, an unidentified man had been able to move freely through a wing of the palace reserved exclusively for the royal children. Isolde did not soften the fact for the officials gathered there. Someone inside the system had failed, and everyone in the room understood exactly what that meant for a family that was supposed to be the safest in the country. Cassian pressed both palms against the table and lowered his head. Isolde stepped closer but did not touch him, giving him the silence he needed. Neither royal spoke for several seconds. But one particular question remained unanswered, and it was going to force a reckoning neither of them was prepared for. Behind the formal statement being drafted for the press, there was a much smaller, much more human story unfolding. Rowan, once the most fearless child in the family, the one who used to run ahead of his security detail just to see how far he could get before someone caught him, had stopped sleeping through the night. He had begun asking his mother, Crown Princess Elena, whether the doors in the nursery wing were locked, and whether the guards outside had checked everyone twice. Elena had approved the very engagement during which the breach occurred, trusting the head of protection when he assured her that every access point had been swept. She now replayed that conversation on a loop, wondering if a single different question might have spared her son the fear that had moved into their home alongside them. Cassian reacted differently than his wife. Every time an aide referred to the breach as an operational lapse, something in him hardened further. An operational lapse could be fixed with a memo and a new checklist. What had happened to his son could not be undone with paperwork. Rowan had started studying the faces of household staff he'd known his whole life, listening for footsteps in hallways that used to feel like the safest place on earth. Isolde's concern deepened further when she reviewed the security log herself and discovered that Rowan had, in fact, described a specific detail about the intruder immediately after the incident, a phrase the man had murmured to him, and that detail had never made it into the official report. A junior aide had judged it too vague to be useful. Isolde did not raise her voice when she confronted him. She simply repeated the boy's words back to him, slowly, and watched the color drain from his face. The investigation deepened, and what it revealed was worse than a single afternoon's failure. Weeks before the incident at Aldermote, the family had attended a public memorial at Thessaly Cathedral, an event remembered at the time as entirely uneventful. But Rowan had mentioned, almost in passing, that a man wearing a temporary staff badge had crouched beside him in a side corridor and used a nickname only the family used at home. The comment had been written off as a child's imagination. Now Isolde was reopening that memory, piece by piece, and realizing that Rowan may have sensed the danger before a single adult around him did. The description he gave, the voice, the height, the odd badge, matched the man from the Aldermore breach almost exactly. This had not been one unlucky afternoon. It had been a pattern, missed because no one had connected the two moments until now. Cassian demanded the full access record, and what he found forced him into a confrontation he had hoped never to have. A senior household official had personally expedited the intruder's temporary clearance months earlier, bypassing a secondary security review in order to avoid delaying preparations for a high-profile state visit. When Cassian sat across from that official, no aides were permitted in the room, and no rehearsed apology was allowed to stand. "My son is not a scheduling inconvenience," Cassian said, and the room went quiet in a way that told everyone present the conversation had shifted from procedure to accountability. What followed inside the palace was not simple. Some courtiers worried that removing Rowan from public duties would be read as weakness or would invite speculation about the health of the monarchy itself. Others worried that publicly admitting the security failure would damage confidence in the crown's ability to protect anyone, let alone a child. Cassian refused to treat his son's safety as a matter of image management. Isolde agreed, but turning their private resolve into official palace policy meant confronting an institution built, generation after generation, to protect appearances above almost everything else. King Edmund, Cassian's father, understood the stakes before anyone explained them fully. The royal household remained formally under his authority, even as Cassian held direct responsibility for his own children. That overlapping authority had quietly caused friction for years, and now it threatened to boil over. Isolde spoke to her brother the king with unusual force, laying out exactly how the boy's fear had changed him, how he flinched at unfamiliar footsteps, how he asked to keep the hallway light on, how he'd started asking whether he had done something wrong to deserve being kept away from his older sister and brother during public events. Edmund read the incident summary twice before setting it down, and asked quietly how many times his grandson had been afraid before anyone told him. No one in the room had an easy answer. By the next morning, changes had begun. Names were removed from schedules. Clearances were suspended. Appearances planned months in advance were quietly cancelled. Rowan's older siblings, Princess Wren and Prince Tobias, noticed his absence immediately. Wren asked why the man who frightened her brother still had the power to change what the whole family did, and Tobias, quieter by nature, asked his father if standing at events without Rowan might make his brother feel left behind. Cassian did not have a perfect answer for either of them, only the promise that they would figure it out together. The turning point came not from any advisor, but from Rowan himself. Alone with his father one evening, away from officials and security briefings, the boy did not ask when he could go back to public life. He asked whether stepping back meant he had let the family down. In that moment, Cassian understood that the crisis had never really been about a missed appearance or broken protocol. It was about making sure his son never confused royal duty with the idea that his own safety was something he had to sacrifice to keep. Cassian knelt beside him, took the small engagement badge Rowan had been given for the event he could no longer attend, and told him plainly that the badge did not measure his courage, and it never would. Rowan asked his father to hold on to it until he felt ready to wear it again, and Cassian promised him something no palace calendar could override. Rowan, not the schedule, would decide when he returned. When the palace's carefully worded statement finally reached the public, the reaction surprised nearly everyone inside Aldermore. Rather than criticism, the dominant response across the kingdom was concern, not for the monarchy's image, but for a child who had clearly been placed in danger and whose early warning had gone unheard. Commentators noted the rare, visible unity between Cassian and Isolde, a father speaking plainly and an aunt known for decades of quiet discipline standing firmly behind him. Outside the palace gates, well-wishers left drawings and handwritten notes, several of them addressed simply to Rowan, telling him to come back only when he was ready. King Edmund signed a new child protection protocol within the week, mandating enhanced screening, lead authorization, and direct oversight for any staff granted access to areas used by the royal children. No official responsible for bypassing the earlier checks kept their position. Cassian read the final terms in silence, aware that the system had failed his son, and that no policy could erase that. But he also understood that refusing to let the matter quietly disappear had made it far less likely to happen to another child in the family, now or in future generations. Weeks later, Rowan chose, on his own, to attend a small private service with his parents and siblings, not a grand public event, but a quiet one. He reached for his father's hand at the entrance, hesitated, and then let go, taking the final steps inside by himself. There was no crowd, no press line, no expectation of a smile for the cameras. Isolde watched from just inside the doorway. As Elena wiped away tears, she no longer tried to hide. It wasn't a return to duty. It was a return to trust, and for the Valdorian royal family, that mattered more than any balcony appearance ever could.